when I think about this Eagles off season, because I've had some time to really sit with it over the course of the weekend. Me and my man Pro Fan Talk, my man Coach Marcus from Pro Fan Talk, we had a conversation yesterday on the channel. Hope you guys had a chance to go check that out. Make sure you go do that. And also make sure you guys are subscribed to him as well. He does great work over there at Pro Fan Talk. But we had a lot of conversations about free agency, the players they brought in, potential position battles, players that were lost, the financial constraints the Philadelphia Eagles are under. You know, we we got into a lot of that stuff. We got into a lot of that stuff. But here's the thing, you guys. I think this off season is going a little bit better than people want to give it credit for. I also think this off season is really telling a story about where the Philadelphia Eagles are going with their roster. If you notice, a lot of the guys that they moved off of, or some of the guys they moved off of, or that they're trying to move off of, they're either approaching 30 or already 30. And we saw the first signs of the youth movement last season, right? James Bradbury to the bench. Eagles have like 3 rookies on the defense who are putting up quality reps. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalen Hunt, right? Reed Blankenship is still a relatively young player. CJ was a young veteran. You know what I mean? Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, those guys were young players entering their second, they were in their second and third years respectively. Nolan Smith, same thing. Zack Baun was like a young veteran, right? But for the most part, on that defense, the oldest guys on that defense was Brandon Graham and Darius Slade. Those guys were 34 and up. And then after that, you had guys that were pretty much 29 and younger. I think Dallas Goedert is 30 now, right? Lane Johnson, I think Lane Johnson's 33, something like that. Let me double check that. Lane Johnson is 34. He's 34, right? But on the defense in particular, it was really Darius Slay and Brandon Graham. Those were your OGs, right? But other than that, everybody else was pretty young, like 27, 28 and younger. And it seems like they're trying to maintain that theme as much as they possibly can. I think the oldest free agent they brought in was Adoree Jackson. I think Adoree Jackson's 29, right? Adoree Jackson is 29. He's 29. He'll be 30 on September 18th. I think that'll be week 2 or week 3 in the NFL season, something like that. Maybe week 2. But regardless, depending if BG comes back, the oldest person on that defense will be Adoree Jackson at age 30. Everybody else is pretty much 27, 28 or younger. Most of those guys are 23, 24, 25. And then you think about the guys they brought in defensively. Josh Uche is 26. He'll be 27 when the season starts. And then everybody else is under the age of 25 or under the age of 26. And then they're going to go into this draft class and they're going to draft more young guys in their early 20s. So the theme of this offseason has been youth. It's been youth. That's been the theme. Betting on youth, evaluating, drafting, and developing, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because although Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, and Isaiah Rodgers also, they weren't old players, but they were players that were due to get some pretty decent money, especially Milton and Sweat. And the Philadelphia Eagles felt like they didn't want to tie up that money there. And I understand that, especially when you feel like you can replace those guys and especially get younger while you do it. And if you trust your coaching staff, Vic Fangio, you trust Clint Hurt on the D-line, you trust Jeremiah Washburn with those edge rushers, you trust Christian Parker, Roy Anderson, and Joe Casper with the DBs, you trust Bobby King with your linebackers, right? When you got guys when you have guys on the coaching staff that you trust to develop the talent, that's when you get the most out of it. Remember, in 2023, we had a lot of young guys on this team, but A, we didn't play them that much. and I'm going to get to all your super chats, you guys. Trust me, I'm going to get to all the super chats. A, we didn't play him that much in 2023. And B, I don't think we had the coaching staff in place to be able to develop said talent. Hence why we didn't get much out of Nolan Smith. Hence why, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis were relying a lot on athleticism. Right? Jalen Carter came in with the tools he had. Jordan Davis, he had a better season than the rookie season, but conditioning was a problem for everybody, really, but especially on the defensive line. They weren't playing young guys. They didn't have a deep enough rotation. It was just a mess. It was a mess. And you weren't getting much, if anything, out of that linebacker room. We were piecemealing the linebacker room, it seemed like every few weeks. Nicholas Morrow, Shaq Leonard, Nakobe Dean, if he was healthy, right? It just seemed like that linebacker room was all over the place. So then you bring in Vic Fangio, you draft better, you essentially get rid of that old defensive staff, you get rid of Sean Desai, you get rid of Matt Patricia, you get rid of DK McDonald with the DBs, you get rid of a lot of those guys on defense, and you just bring in Vic Fangio and allow him to build out his defensive staff. You kept certain people, but for the most part, you gutted that staff on defense. And now you replace those old guys, Sean Desai and his crew, you replace those guys with guys that can actually teach, guys that have a track record of developing. And when you see it take shape the way it did in 2024, and it leads to a Super Bowl victory, how can you be surprised, rather, if Howie Roseman decides to move on from guys who want to get paid and decides to bet on youth? Because he trusts his farm system. He trusts the coaches he has in the building to be able to get the most out of players. He trusts the guys he has in the building to be able to get the most out of these free agents that are, 26 going on 27. He trusts that. It's kind of hard to bet against that when you've seen what they've been able to do with the rookie talent. Now, granted, it's important to curb expectations with, various guys that we brought in. We have to curb our expectations with Harrison Bryant and Kylan Granson, the two tight ends we brought in. We have to curb our expectations when it comes to Josh Uche, right? We know Josh Uche had that singular double-digit sack season, but one can argue that was more of an outlier in comparison to what he's done the rest of his career. But I trust that whatever these guys have left, Adoree Jackson, right? Patrick Johnson, we brought him back as well on the edge. We drafted him. We decided to bring him back. I trust that Vic Fangio, along with the rest of his coaching staff, has the capabilities, has the tools to be able to bring out the most out of whatever these guys have left. Whatever these guys may have on defense in particular, right? I trust that. I genuinely do. That's not blind faith. That's not blind support. That's me looking at the financials the Philadelphia Eagles have dealt with or are dealing with, thinking about the decisions they made leading up to this point, how they got to this point, the success they've been able to have based off said decisions. How can I not trust that they don't have? How can I trust that they don't have the best interest of this team? How can I not trust that? Let me read some of your comments real quick. Marley Coldberg says we don't have to curb our expectations because we don't expect much out of them. If they're able to perform, they would be on the field. If not, they would get cut. Well, speak for yourself, Marley. Speak for yourself. The reality is, when you bring a guy in, you expect something out of it. You expect something. Speak for yourself. The reality is, they brought in Josh Uche to keep Jalen Hunt honest. That's a fact. They brought in Josh Uche to keep Jalen Hunt honest. They brought in Adoree Jackson to keep Kelee Ringo honest. They brought in, who else? They brought back Patrick Johnson to keep those edge rushers honest. So when it comes to these free agents, sure, you ultimately don't know what they're going to provide. You don't know. Just how we didn't know Zack Baun would be what he would be. We didn't know We ultimately didn't know what Quinyon and Cooper Jean would give us, no matter what their draft stock said. We ultimately didn't know. Who else? That goes for who else we brought in via free agency? I can't quite remember, but regardless, when you bring in people, you're trying to fortify your roster leading up to the draft. When you bring in these guys, obviously you expect them to compete, and you want your signing to your signing to show value, basically, right? You want your signing to show value, because whether you want to accept it or not, Marley, some people have expectations, some people don't. Based off of the way people have reacted to the offseason, their expectations are fairly high. They're fairly high. Because when you lose Josh Sweat, when you lose Milton Williams, you lose CJ GJ, right? Sidney Brown, there's expectations for him. Keely Ringo, there are expectations for him. When you lose guys like CJ GJ, Darius Slay, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Isaiah Rodgers, when you lose guys like that, and you try to and you potentially may lose Dallas Goedert, right? The reality is you're trying or hoping that your free agent signings, your budget free agent signings, can help the cream rise to the top, whether they're the ones involved or not, whether they make the roster or not. You want their presence to help the cream rise to the top, and also it's going to help you, or it's going to prevent you from reaching in the draft, because you don't want to draft off of need. That's where a lot of teams go wrong, drafting off of need instead of drafting the best talent that's in front of you. So whether we want to accept it or not, or whether we're lying to ourselves or not, there are people who have expectations. We all look at the highlights. We all look at the film. We all look at it. We all watch it. Everyone has some level of expectations. Simple as that. And I don't know what curving expectation. I don't know if you really know what it means. If you don't expect much, you're already curving your expectations. You're doing that. I hope you understand what you're saying, Marley. You say we don't have to curve our expectations, but you also say we don't expect much. That's by definition curving your expectations. You're keeping your expectations at bay. You're not allowing your expectations to supersede the reality. That's curving your expectations. That's exactly what you're doing, whether you realize it or not. Let's get to another one. Eagles Dynasty. He says, this Eagles team is talented and loaded with stars, just like the 49ers were the past few years. The difference is the Eagles have a pipeline of young players. That's a very good point, Eagles Dynasty. That's a very good point. I think where the 49ers went wrong is that they were relying too heavily on their stars, and they weren't doing a good enough job building a foundation of young players that can step in and take that next step. And I think that's why they're offloading a lot of guys. And look, they're going to have to do a lot of drafting. They're going to have to draft really well. Maybe they're offloading guys because they believe some guys can step up. They traded Deebo Samuel. They still got Brandon Ayuk, but they traded Deebo Samuel. One of the reasons they probably did that is because they still got Ricky Pearsall, right? A guy that they think can take that next step. They're betting on their young talent, but I think defensively is where they take their biggest hit. I think defensively is where they're going to take their biggest hit. But I think your overall point is right, though. I think that I do agree. I don't think they did a good enough job at making sure they had a strong enough foundation of youth and talent. I do agree with that. And I also think they mishandled some funds. Excuse me. Mike with the super chat. Well, not super chat, but the comment, excuse me. Mike says, He says, do we need another linebacker or is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. the future? Mike, we do need another linebacker. And that's not saying Jeremiah Trotter Jr. can't play. That's not saying that Kobe Dean can't play. They don't really have much there. They don't really have much there at that linebacker spot. Just from a personnel standpoint. At linebacker, you have Zack Baun, Kobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., this guy named Dallas Gant, and you have Ben Van Sumeren, who's a fullback / linebacker, but they have him listed as a fullback. But on some of these depth charts, they have him listed as a linebacker. Regardless, though, they need more from that linebacker position. Zack Baun is obviously going to be ready. Kobe Dean, he's likely going to start the season on the PUP list. We don't know what Jeremiah Trotter can be over the course of a season. And you just overall lack depth at that position. You lack depth. I think that's the cold, hard reality. You lack depth at that position. And I don't think that's an indictment on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I think the Eagles not signing a linebacker in free agency thus far kind of tells you that they have some faith in Jeremiah Trotter Jr. to take that next step. I think them not bringing back Oren Burks, which was probably the cheapest contract they could have brought back, seeing what he got from Cincinnati. I think not bringing back Oren Burks tells you a lot about how they feel regarding Jeremiah Trotter Jr. But that's not to say they won't draft another linebacker. I think they will draft a linebacker, maybe in the mid to late rounds. It won't be early. But I think they do draft another linebacker, and I do think we need another linebacker. But I also believe they have faith in Jeremiah Trotter Jr. to take that next step. Because again, we don't know what Nakobe Dean is going to be when he comes back. We don't know. Excuse me. Nakobe has battled some injuries in his career, and this is probably the most serious he's dealt with on the NFL level. I think he ruptured or tore his patella tendon. That's not going to be easy to bounce back from. And it happened in the playoffs. So, again, we may not see him until maybe November. We may not see Nakobe until November, late October. And if Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is playing very well next to Zack Baun and the defense is humming, who's to say they put Jeremiah Trotter back on the bench and put Nakobe Dean? Who's to say that they do that? You know what I mean? Nakobe Dean is in a precarious situation right now. He is. Trotter Jr. is young. He's on a rookie deal. That rookie deal gives the Eagles flexibility. Nakobe Dean is entering the final year of his contract. He's going to be looking for some kind of contract on Philadelphia Eagles. Maybe the Eagles give him a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, whatever it may be. But I do think the Eagles need another linebacker for depth for sure. Also, another linebacker just to challenge Trotter. Like, there's no one on this. There's nobody at linebacker that's going to really challenge Trotter. Ben Van Sumeren won't. And again, I understand he was listed as a fullback when they re-signed him, but he still has linebacker capabilities. But Ben Van Sumeren won't challenge him. This guy named Dallas Gant on the roster, he won't challenge him. So they're going to have to draft a linebacker, maybe two, to challenge and keep Trotter Jr. on his toes. MJS, he says Howie does a great job preparing this roster for the draft. Last 4 drafts have been really great for this team. It has, and you know when you make the right free agent calls prior to the draft, it prevents you from reaching. You see, a lot of people only pay attention to the splash moves in free agency, and I think that's a trick. I think that's a trick. You know, we've seen a lot of roster building in our time watching football. We've seen teams spend a lot of money in free agency, have we not, you guys? We've seen teams spend a lot of money and they don't get the return on the investment because they probably put the money in the wrong places. They probably went for the big name instead of going for the right name, the right player. It's easy to get wrapped up in that. That's why I brought up the Denzel quote, the Denzel Washington quote on Twitter. That's why I brought it up. Eagles fans, do not confuse movement with progress. Do not confuse movement with progress. Just because you see your opponents making these big, hefty, splashy moves in free agency and the Eagles aren't, doesn't mean that they're trending in the right direction or they're automatically going to get better. It doesn't always work that way. There's fit, there's coaching, there's execution, there's chemistry, there's trust, there's health, right? There's so much that goes into it, right? Do not confuse movement with progress. These other organizations, these other teams still have a lot of ground to cover when it comes to catching up with the Philadelphia Eagles. So yes, Howie Roseman does an amazing job with his budget moves, right? He makes enough of them. And even if you make 5 budget signings and 2 of them hit, that's a success in the NFL. It's like baseball. It's like baseball, right? I think in the MLB, they always say if you hit, what is it, 25% of the time, if you have a batting average of .250, you're almost like guaranteed to make the Hall of Fame or whatever that is. What is the number? Where my baseball fans at? What's the batting average where they say if you average this batting average for your career, you're pretty much guaranteed the Hall of Fame? What is it? Is it 300 or is it 250? What is it? Where my baseball fans at? 300. Thank you, MJ. Yes, 300. 300. Thank you. Bam, man. Thank you. So my point is, right, I kind of treat roster building and the draft like baseball a little bit. Thank you, Pharaoh. KGK, thank you. 300. In the MLB, if you bat 300 for your career, you're pretty much guaranteed for the Hall of Fame. Pretty much. Think about that. That's basically hitting 3 pitches out of 10. 3 pitches out of 10. That doesn't sound like a good average. But when you think about it in terms of value and what 3 hits out of 10 can do in the context of a draft class, that's pretty damn good. That's pretty damn good. So my point is, if Howie Roseman drafts 7 guys, and let's just say 3 of them hit, what is that? 3 divided by 7, that's 40. That's 43%. It's 428 or 429, however you want to round up. But basically, that's 43% on average. If Howie Roseman is able to draft 7 players this year, or if he decides, because he will be able to, if he decides to draft 7 players and 3 of them become starting level players, if they hit, that's a successful draft class. Would you guys agree with that?